All right, let's dive into one of the most brutal punishments ever. It's called Nine Familial Exterminations.
Intense, right.
Totally. And it might sound like, I don't know, some dystopian novel or something.
Yeah.
But this was a real thing in pre-modern China, Korea, and Vietnam. So picture this.
Yeah.
You commit a serious crime, probably treason.
Right.
And not only do you get executed, your entire extended family is wiped out too.
It's a wild concept, really shows how differently societies back then viewed individual responsibility versus collective responsibility.
Right.
Yeah, and we aren't talking about a simple death sentence here.
Right.
This was meticulously planned to completely erase entire bloodlines.
It really is mind-boggling.
It is.
And we say 9 familial exterminations. Who exactly are we talking about? Like, how many people are we actually talking about?
A lot, a shocking amount.
Oh,
it
yeah.
wasn't just your immediate family. It was your parents, your grandparents, your kids, grandkids, siblings, and their spouses, even your aunts and uncles and their spouses. And get this, your cousins, your spouse, even your spouse's parents.
Wait, so even the in-laws?
Yeah, everyone.
That's crazy. Imagine being held accountable for something your child's spouse did.
Right.
I mean, it really makes you think about family ties and collective responsibility, especially in these cultures.
For sure. Family was seen as one unit, all linked, all responsible for each other.
Right.
And this punishment was meant to be the ultimate deterrent.
Oh, yeah.
This horrifying consequence, so no one would even think about messing with the system.
I bet that instilled some serious fear.
Oh, yeah.
But there were exceptions, right? Like I read that young children weren't always executed.
Yeah, that's right. Kids under a certain age were sometimes spared execution, but they were made slaves instead.
Wow. That's still really grim.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that even in a system that brutal, there were attempts to figure out the morality of punishing the innocent.
Right. A fascinating paradox.
Totally. So how did this whole practice even start? Was it always this organized and widespread?
It wasn't always that way, no. We can trace it way back to ancient texts, like the Book of Documents.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, really important for understanding ancient Chinese history.
Right.
And it gives us clues about how this punishment evolved. It seems like early on it was more of a threat used by officers to keep their troops in line, not the organized system it later became.
So it started as more of a scare tactic.
Exactly, yeah. It evolved over centuries, starting with the 3 clans punishment during the spring and autumn period.
Okay.
And a major figure in making it official was Shang Yang. He was a legalist reformer during the Qin dynasty.
Ooh, Shang Yang. Now things are getting interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Shang Yang actually wrote the 9 Familial Exterminations into law.
Oh, wow.
But then, kind of crazy, he ended up a victim of that same law.
Talk about irony.
I know, right?
That makes you think about power, how unpredictable it can be.
Totally.
Even the people who create the rules can get trapped by them.
Exactly. So, yeah, it evolved over centuries, but did different dynasties use it differently?
I would imagine so, yeah.
Oh, they did. For sure.
So,
Well, like the Qin dynasty, where Shang Yang made it law, they were known for being incredibly harsh with this punishment.
right.
Like the emperor Qin Shi Huang, he ruled with an iron fist, and these 9 familial exterminations, that was like a symbol of his power.
And probably part of why that dynasty didn't last that long.
Yeah, that extreme severity might have backfired.
Right.
Yeah.
Did any of the other dynasties try to maybe tone it down a bit?
Yeah, the Han dynasty, the one after the Qin dynasty, they were more moderate.
Okay.
They saw how extreme things got and often reversed the 9 familial extermination sentences.
Interesting. So they learned from the Qin dynasty's mistakes.
Yeah, you could say that,
Right.
like a pendulum swinging back and forth between extremes.
Right.
Yeah.
So what happened after the Han dynasty? Did things kind of stay moderate?
Not really, no. The Tang dynasty, for example, they kind of narrowed it down, only using it for people plotting against the emperor.
Interesting.
But then with the Ming and Qing dynasties,
yeah.
it swung back again. They expanded its use and made it even more, I guess, official.
Wow. So it really was like this back and forth.
Yeah.
And the 10 exterminations inflicted on, what was his name? Feng Xiaoru.
Right. Feng Shui.
During the Ming dynasty.
Yeah.
That would be on the brutal end of the spectrum for sure.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's a really gruesome example of how far they could take it.
Right.
It reminds you how much cruelty can exist, even in systems that are supposed to be about justice.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, we've talked about the who and the when, but I'm still stuck on the why, you know? Why those 9 specific groups of people? Like, was there a reason, a logic behind it, or was it just random?
There's definitely a logic, yeah. It goes back to this idea of guangxi. It basically means relationships or connections.
Okay.
And those 9 groups, they represented the most important relationships in a person's life.
Okay.
At least according to the social norms back then.
So they weren't just trying to kill a person. They were trying to, like, destroy all their social ties, too.
Exactly. It was about totally wiping them out, socially and within their family.
Wow.
You know, being cut off from your family, especially in these cultures where family and ancestry were so important, that was like losing your identity.
Yeah.
It was like losing your place in the world.
It's like they were erasing you, not just killing you.
Yeah.
That makes it even more terrifying, the psychological impact.
Totally. It sent a message not just to the person being punished, but to everyone else, too.
Like, don't even think about going against the system.
Exactly.
Wow. And it wasn't just about fear, right? It was about control, too.
Oh, yeah.
If you wipe out a whole family, no one's left to take revenge.
Exactly. Yeah. It was a really harsh way of, I guess you could say, preventing problems before they started.
Yeah, preemptive control.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine the effect that must have had on people. Just thinking about speaking out against anything.
Right.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. The history of this punishment, the specific groups targeted, the reasons behind it, even how it showed up in other cultures. But why should our listener care? This isn't something that happens anymore, thankfully.
Right. It's easy to think of it as just some, barbaric thing from the past. But I think these practices, they give us a look into human nature.
Okay.
The dynamics of power,
Right.
how societies deal with people disagreeing or rebelling. It makes us ask tough questions about how far punishment should go.
Yeah.
The dangers of blaming everyone for what one person did.
Well,
These are things that are still relevant today.
that's true. We might think we've moved past that kind of brutality.
Yeah.
But those impulses,
Right.
the fear of rebellion, the desire for order, wanting to punish not just the person, but everyone connected to them, that's still part of human nature.
It is, yeah. It's not just about looking back at history. It's about understanding how those impulses from the past still affect us today in ways we might not even realize.
Okay, I see what you mean. So we've covered a lot here. What do you think is the most important thing to take away from all this?
I think it's the contrast, You have this brutal punishment,
Right.
but it's based on all these social and philosophical ideas.
Interesting.
It's easy to just call it barbaric, but it was a product of its time. It shows what people valued back then, what they were afraid of.
Okay.
And that's important. Even the most horrible practices can have a logic behind them.
Right, even if it's a twisted logic.
Exactly. It's not about agreeing with it. It's about understanding it.
Right.
And when we understand it, we understand ourselves better and the complicated societies we create.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it is. It's a lot to think about. I mean, it's easy to judge the past,
No, yeah,
but it's harder to actually learn from it.
totally.
And I think that's what we're doing here, not just talking about some horrible thing that happened, but using it to look at our own values, our own ideas about justice and responsibility.
Yeah, I agree. It makes us think about how our societies deal with those same issues.
Right, even if it's in totally different ways.
Exactly.
So last question, something to think about. Could you imagine a world like today where this 9 familial exterminations thing was still happening?
It's a crazy thought, right?
It is.
Just because you're related to someone who committed a crime,
Yeah.
you could be executed.
Yeah. I mean, it makes you think about, like you were saying before, human nature,
Yeah.
how much people want control, and how easily fear can be used to justify doing awful things.
It really makes you appreciate how far we've come
Right.
in terms of individual rights and making sure everyone gets a fair trial.
But it also reminds us that we can't just assume things will stay that way.
No, definitely not.
We always have to question those in power and why they're punishing people,
Exactly.
even if their reasons sound logical.
History is full of examples of, how things can go from civilized to barbaric really quickly.
That's a good point, and a good place to wrap up, I think.
Yeah.
We went to some dark places today,
We did.
but I hope it was, I don't know, insightful.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that even the worst parts of history can teach us something.
About ourselves
Yeah, about ourselves, about how complicated human behavior is.
and the challenges of building a fair society.
Exactly.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you want to learn more, check out the show notes. We have links to the sources we used.
And keep thinking about these things. Keep exploring. Keep asking questions about the world.
Past and present.
That's right.
Until next time, keep diving deep.